So welcome, Analiza Quiroz Wolf. I'm so excited to have you here to talk about shattering the glass ceiling, although I am also going to ask you a number of questions about your amazing, amazing career. So I'm just going to read some highlights to whet everyone's appetite because you have the most fascinating background. I think your background, I describe it as kick-ass Renaissance woman, because you've done so many different things. So you are an executive coach, facilitator, and strategy consultant. That's what you're doing now. I can't wait to read the rest of it. On a mission to support leaders, especially people of color and women, to be leaders in their organizations. So you run a leadership cohort program called Boss Mamas. You also have a podcast of the same name. And what I love is that you have deep experience in education, leading schools for low-income students of color. So most recently, you were CEO for neighborhood charter schools, but you were also, and this is where the whole Renaissance woman comes in, you were also a brand manager at Colgate-Palmolive and a captain in the U.S. Air Force. That's all that. You're also a Fulbright Fellow, a Pahara Fellow. You graduated from Stanford, and you also have an MBA, and you did the Broad residency, which for everyone who has not heard of that is a very prestigious education fellowship. So that really is so impressive. And you are a 3-time author. You wrote, among other things, you wrote Asian Americans Among Us, Who Inspire Us, and that won an award. And your latest book, Native Americans Who Inspire Us. So I was lucky enough to get an advanced copy. It is a beautiful book. So I will put all the links to the event page so that you will have that. But welcome, and thank you so much for joining me for this.
Thanks so much, Caroline, for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. So talk to me about, so I like to start with the whole journey to CEO, because a lot of my audience and my readers, they are also kick-ass, ambitious, talented professionals. And there's always that question about how do you make that leap into the executive ranks, particularly the C-level ranks. So did you always know that you wanted to be a CEO?
Definitely not. When I was a kid, I'm Asian, I'm Filipina, and I had this dream of being a doctor. Except when I went to Stanford, I was like, wow, there's a lot of blood and biology and chemistry involved. And so I pivoted and I thought I wanted to be a banker and consultant. Back in the day, that was what people wanted to be, like power suits, this black suit. I didn't know what I was doing in the office, but I thought if I wore a power suit like that, then that would be amazing. So I had this idea that I would be this power suit person, but then I had a mentor at Stanford who was Filipino. And his name was Louis Faustino. He's since passed away, but he was an incredible mentor who, asked me the questions about who am I, who do you want to be in life? What legacy do you want to leave? And that saying, Caroline, in Tagalog, that's utang na loob.
Yes. How would you translate that? It's like your deep, like debt, or how would you translate that?
Exactly. So utang is like debt, and naloob means from the inside. So it's this debt from the inside of gratitude. So for us, coming from the Philippines, and then I was born in the States, or having this, American opportunity, the American dream, going to school, this was this debt that I didn't even know I had, for wanting to give back. And so my Tito, I called him Tito Louis. He helped me just get more clear that I wanted a life of service. And he said, if you do what you love, you'll never have to work a day in your life. So that's what the whole arc of, the military, starting these different nonprofits, starting schools for low-income kids. All of it was about service. I'd never aspired to be a CEO. It was just about climbing so that I could have the most impact. So never did I imagine wanting to be CEO or being CEO.
But you did. So, nobody gets there kind of tripping over stuff. So at some point, there is a moment where you're a senior executive at an organization, because I've been a recruiter for over 25 years. So I've seen this. I've seen so many different industries. I've seen nonprofit, private sector. It plays out always the same. There's a moment. There are a number of executives who who can ascend into these C-level spots. And so you're not just going to get it just for being there. So you must have decided, and then you must have gone for it. And so can you talk a little bit about that decision process and then what you feel like you did differently to make that journey?
So while I didn't plan on being CEO, in the last move before CEO, I was looking to actually work for a leader of color, a woman, someone who was not white, male. And I deliberately set that out as like on my list of what's most important. I said, I want a diverse leader. And I, like you, have had this long career. So I have a good network of people to ask the question. I'm looking for a person of color, a woman. Can you please tell me a good leader to work for? And I asked a lot of people. And frankly, that list was tiny, like a couple people long. And I'm in New York City, so you would think that I'd have so many options, but it really was a small list. And I thought to myself, wow, that's really problematic because we're serving most often people of color. And how are we even as a diverse group, like reflecting that back? So that was the first realization. And the second is that I was talking to recruiters, and a white male recruiter who also had a lot of experience like you, Caroline, he said, have you ever considered being a CEO? And I was like, what? No, I don't think so. I'm just looking to work for a leader. He said, well, I don't see why not. You have this military career. You've been CEO of your schools, of these smaller nonprofits, COO. Why wouldn't you want to be a CEO when you're absolutely qualified? And so it's amazing that I'm doing this work on discrimination and how much I'm internalizing it. And I didn't even realize that as I was, doing this work that I had also internalized for myself. Well, am I enough to be a CEO? And having a white male person tell me, actually, you are. You're ready right now. You should do it right now, because if you want the most impact, you're absolutely qualified. Apply right now. And so that was that part. And the last part I would say is I wasn't looking necessarily for jobs. I was trying to actually explore maybe being an entrepreneur or consult. And I had this opportunity to help with turning around a school. And I said, hey, I've done that a lot of times in my career. And they ended up offering me the CEO position. It was such a surprise. And it was a really good match to my skills. I'm just an operator. I love alignment, helping to make things like stronger people, processes, systems. And that's what they needed. So it was a good match for skill. And if I had been a consultant, when I thought about it, it is very, very difficult to be a change agent as a consultant. So my skills matched what the organization needed. It happened to be the CEO position. And so I said, this is a great opportunity. I can be the change. I can also help lead in the way that I hope that we can center diversity, equity, inclusion. And this will be great. So I had these big dreams and I stepped right into the role.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. So I do want to talk about your next pivot, which is to be an entrepreneur and founder of Boss Mamas. But before we leave the CEO journey, because again, I have so many readers and audience who want to get that brass ring, what did you learn when you were a CEO that you wish you knew when you started?
So many things. So probably the first thing I learned is that we can be CEOs. Like as women, as people of color, we're very much prepared, I believe, with the experiences we have. Having been in the military, just had this skill of being able to lead people and get us all aligned and deal with all of the crisis and keep very flexible. And so one is that we can do it. We can absolutely do it. So that's the first, is like confidence and belief. And then the second is that being CEO, I didn't know this before, but Caroline, is so lonely. Like you make hard decisions. You're pretty unpopular, especially if you're doing a ton of change management. And so there's not your group of people. If you think about the organizational health surveys, one of the questions is, do you have a best friend at work? Do you have friends at work? And I didn't have friends. Like there was no people at work that I could really trust and confide in, and it was inappropriate. And so having that tension between boss and then people, and then not having very close ties, it led to just feeling isolated. I probably should have gotten a coach, a therapist. I ended up joining YPO, Young Presidents Organization, to get a peer set, but I did that way late in my tenure. I should have done that earlier. So that's the second thing. And the third thing as CEO is that there's this opportunity to be the change, which I thought would be amazing. Like, I really believe in doing the work, but also doing it sustainably, to be a mother and to have, being a parent be something that we could talk about, caring for our own kids. But I found that there is a reason why there's not a lot of mom CEOs. There's a reason why there's not a lot of women CEOs. There's a reason why there's not a lot of people of color CEOs. And it's not to say that there's not opportunity to grow, but there's not a lot of opportunity to make mistakes or really, get things right. Some of the feedback, I love feedback. I lead through empathy and I really want people to feel heard. But some of the things that people would tell me, I was just thinking to myself pretty often, I don't know if they would say that if I were a white male. And so these are these, experiences where I just realized later in my tenure, wow, there's me, and I think I can get better. I know I can get better as a leader, but there's also this real bias baked into the system that makes it hard to achieve as a person, a diverse leader at the top.
Yeah. One of the common things that I would hear when I'd be internal to a company is she's got sharp elbows. You never hear that kind of criticism with a guy. Like, there's no equivalent of sharp elbows. So yeah, so I hear you. So let's talk about the pivot. So how did you know that it was time to leave CEO and go out on your own?
So I also believe as a leader that there are different types of leaders that are needed based on where the organization is. I am a startup person. I am also scaling and turning around a person. I tend to be in places where it's messy. And if the organization needs that skill, then I feel like I can help and move us forward. But then there's also leaders where maybe you need a really inspiring leader. Maybe you need someone who's a really good fundraiser. Maybe you need someone who is able to, teach whatever the mission is that is needed for that leader to do. You want to match it. And so at that point in my tenure as a CEO, I had turned around the organization. That was what I was hired to do, is really set up, making sure we're financially solvent. We had facilities, that it was clear how the team structure would work, that we had centered diversity, equity, inclusion, and had a plan. So those things were built. That's what I had done in my past and had done there. But what they needed was a leader who, could honestly have the instructional chops. I'd never been a teacher in the classroom. I'd not been a principal. I led schools, but I didn't have that instructional might. And also someone who I think was more values aligned. And so it was, I could have stayed on, but I decided, this is a time for me to let someone else lead and do a great job with the organization, because it's about the kids. And if I'm not the right match, then wonderful to let someone and a successor there to lead, and do a great job. So that's when I knew it was time to leave.
Yeah, that's great. And you had mentioned that even before you took the CEO role, that you had been thinking about entrepreneurship. So how did you know it's the right time? How did you come up with Boss Mom? Is like kind of, I hear from a lot of aspiring entrepreneurs too, and they're like, oh, how do I know that my idea is fully baked and that now is the right time? So how did you know?
So I think, been an entrepreneur since the beginning. I really love to, whenever there's a problem, to just figure out how I can be part of it if there's no solution. And that's actually how I ended up writing these books, which we'll talk about later. But if there's not anything out there, then what can I do? How can I build it? And so with this entrepreneurial career, and then having that pivot before CEO, where I was getting opportunities to consult, and I was trying to decide, should I be CEO or should I be an entrepreneur and consult? That when I ended up deciding to leave that CEO position, I thought, well, if any time was a good time to go out on my own, this is a great time. I really love coaching. I also decided that this was a time to focus on maybe a new mission instead of K-12 education and supporting particularly kids of color, low-income kids of color. I wanted to pivot toward leaders, knowing myself how difficult the journey is as a woman, as a leader of color. I wanted to support more leaders of color. So having that clarity of mission, that I wanted to focus on these leaders. Second, knowing that there was a lot of opportunity to have impact with other consulting gigs. And third, just the opportunity to be more creative, to do things like a podcast, or even have time to do these types of interviews, or meet other people, write books. It just seemed like a great opportunity to just step out and allow myself a new chapter.
Yeah. So can you talk a little bit about your time management? Just because I'm in awe that you've been able to release and just finish like so many of these things. And so even Native Americans who inspire us, right? So like, how long was that in the works? How did you fit that in? Do you see that as part of the boss mama's family, or kind of a separate thing? And how do you make the call to do that, invest in that versus something else?
It's a great question. So for me, it's understanding what really matters to me. And what really matters to me is that we have more diversity at the leadership level, at the children level, like wherever we are, that we want to have opportunities to know that what your passion is, or where you come from, you can also be successful. And so that's the reason for Boss Mamas, which is this leadership program I started for women leaders to be moms and leaders. You can do all the things if you get really clear and you think about how you spend your time and your values, et cetera. And then for Native Americans, it was this idea that after I had written Asian Americans Who Inspire Us, where are the books about Native Americans? And so I actually wrote that with my 10-year-old, he's now 10. And it was this passion project where, it's like mom and kid work together, learn about the culture, and start to write stories and find an illustrator to bring this to life. And so that happened after school. It also happened, frankly, I was CEO at the time. And so I'd wake up at 4 a.m. When I was stressed out about something, I'd get up and then put my energy into writing these stories. It was a way of, I think, healing too. There was such tough stuff going on at work and in the world that having this creative channel was a way to kind of heal and take care of myself that I ended up loving. But it definitely happened at these like off hours.
Yeah, no, that's great that you've managed to juggle all of that. And so I do want to talk about your work with Shattering the Glass Ceiling, and what you've seen in your work there, just coaching people and consulting to companies. But before we go there, perhaps this is a good segue. So one of the most popular questions that I get about career change is naysayers, just like family and friends who will be shocked that you're leaving this good job, or that you're taking this big risk, or that you're, fill in the blank. There are going to be a lot of people who will give you unsolicited advice. Sometimes it's bad advice, and sometimes it's outright mean. And so I can imagine, given all of your pivots, military to corporate to nonprofit, to now doing your own thing, you must have gotten a lot of these comments and aside. So how do you deal with naysayers? And did you have support? I mean, maybe like that wasn't your experience.
Yeah, luckily I have a really supportive family, my parents, my brother, and then I think importantly, my partner. And he has been such a great support for anything in my life. So this is not new, but the pivot to entrepreneurship, especially he had seen me lead as CEO. He said, I think this could be the right time to pursue other opportunities of impact. So luckily I had that huge support at home. I also have to name that we financially, because we're further along in our career and he works in finance, we had this cushion that he could work and we would be okay without my income for a while. And we put together a spreadsheet. We forecasted forward 20 years just to make sure that we would be okay with the children. We have 2 young kids who are 6 and 10. And so having that base of just knowing that I would be okay was a key part. But there are also some naysayers. I think maybe it's not naysayers, but people who wondered, well, why don't you keep going? Because there's all these other CEO opportunities where you could continue to lead. They really need that kind of leadership that you offer. And there's kids that are struggling in families and you could really make a difference. And I think that's true. And at the same time, I think this is a chapter where I can still have the impact, maybe in a different way, but I can still help to support missions. And so it's about developing leaders that can do the work. And so how can I be behind the scenes and support? So that's how that ended up being, where the naysayers think we're more about the mission, but luckily had a ton of support from people close to me.